Our story begins with a man sleeping peacefully in his bed. The clock on his nightstand begins buzzing at 7:03 a.m. He tosses and turns as the clock continues buzzing. Reaching over, he hits the snooze button. He is now fully awake, and we get a closer look at his face. He sits up in his bed as his voice begins narrating the story. We find out his name is Jack Barnaby. Jack gets out of bed and walks to the kitchen. He opens the cupboard doors. Inside the cupboard is a container of coffee. Jack looks inside and discovers the can to be empty. He angrily tosses it back into the cupboard. Opening the fridge, Jack discovers he is out of eggs as well. "No eggs!" he exclaims. He throws the empty carton back into the fridge. Frustrated and annoyed, he grabs his keys from the kitchen table. He then leaves the apartment, pulling the door shut behind him. In dire need of coffee and eggs, Jack begins his journey to the supermarket. He's waving to everyone he encounters during his walk. He closes his eyes and begins narrating again. Jack reminisces about what a beautiful place the Bronx was. A man standing on a corner dressed in black is reading the daily paper. A customer walks out of the store with an unlit cigarette in his mouth. He digs through his pockets for a lighter, but comes up empty. The man in black snaps his finger and points at the unlit cigarette. The cigarette ignites, much to the man's surprise. He is confused and has no idea what just happened. He looks around, but finds no one and then walks away. The man in black continues reading the newspaper. He is studying the obituary section, noting various causes of death. He eventually turns the paper over for the sports column. Jack walks out of the store, heading towards the dark figure. The man in black is startled as Jack turns the corner. The newspaper falls out of his hands. It lands beside Jack's feet. He slowly picks up the paper. Jack hands the newspaper to the man in black. They engage in a conversation. Jack inquires how he knew his name. He quickly figures out the man in black to be Death. He tells Death that his black attire gave it all away. Death is shocked and disgusted as they both part ways. Jack recounts the events of the day, narrating as he explains, enjoying the cool evening breeze out on his balcony. It is now the next morning, precisely 7:03 a.m. Jack is lying in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. There is a sudden knock at the door. Jack is reluctant to answer. All right, I'm coming," he yells out as he answers the door. Death is standing in the doorway with a sesame seed bagel in his mouth. Jack sarcastically greets him. He enters the apartment without being invited in. The door slams shut. Jack questions Death's manners and rude behavior. Death sarcastically offers to take off his shoes. Jack is urged to get ready as they're heading out. Death exhibits some nosy behavior during his brief wait for Jack. Jack returns dressed in a brightly colored Hawaiian shirt. Death mocks the shirt as they both leave the apartment. They walk out of the building and head for the car. We discover Death's car is a black PT Cruiser with a missing hubcap. They speed off and head for the cemetery. Jack and Death arrive at the cemetery. They walk down a long path. Eventually, Death stops. He points to the ground and tells Jack this is where he'll be buried. Jack's confusion soon turns to frustration. He exclaims, "Forget it, you're not putting me there." Death offers to put in the paperwork for a less deserted lot. Jack thanks him and calls Death a friend. Death admits never to being called that and smiles. Both men begin walking back toward the car. Jack stops suddenly and laughs Death in the face. At first, Death is annoyed, but eventually realizes the charm. Jack is lying in bed, with his eyes wide open. The alarm clock begins buzzing at 7:03 a.m. There is a knock on the door as Jack gets out of bed. He greets Death and questions if he's ever late, to which he replies, no. Death explains that part of his contract is to take Jack wherever he wishes. Jack is all ears as Death offers to explain why he is being so nice to him. Death is embarrassed, but begins to tell the story anyway. Through a flashback, Death explains he was gambling with a colleague 3 weeks ago. Death gets frustrated after losing several games in a row. He accuses Rico, the Puerto Rican Reaper, of cheating. Rico stands up and tries to prove his adversary wrong. He tells Death that he is many things, but not a cheater. Rico hands out the punishment for the losing bet. Death is to be kind and courteous to his next victim. The flashback ends. Jack consoles Death, saying the punishment is not so bad after all. He offers to take Death somewhere for a change. We're going for pizza, he tells him. Death is first shocked, then becomes annoyed. Death's car is double parked outside, but they decide to walk. They walk to the pizzeria. They both enter, Jack leading the way. Jack orders a pizza and advises Death to try a slice. Death is skeptical, but it's love at first bite. Jack pushes a soda can across the table, urging Death to try it. He gulps down the can of soda. Empty cans and a single slice of pizza are on the table. They both leave the pizzeria with their hunger satisfied. Jack and Death are standing up the street from a deli. Death points to a suspicious-looking man. The man robs the deli as Death explains how fate will deal with this criminal. On his way home later that day, the man carelessly crosses a street. An ice cream truck approaches. The man is startled. He is hit by the truck. The Mr. Softy jingle begins playing. Jack questions Death as to how he is going to die. Death refuses to answer, stating he is not allowed to tell. When asked if he's going to miss Jack, he smiles and says yes. The two share a friendly embrace. A montage begins as the two men are playing dominoes in the park. Death smiles as he loses the game to Jack. They visit a cemetery and Death places a rose on a grave. They buy hot dogs from a street vendor. They go to the movies. They play basketball. Both men are out of breath. They watch a baseball game on the TV. Jack is sitting up in his bed, fully dressed. There is a knock on the door. Jack answers it expeditiously and is asked where he wants to go. Jack says he is taking Death somewhere for a change. They get into Death's car. They head off into the distance. Jack asks Death to pull the car over next to a church. Jack informs Death that they're going inside. Me in a church, picture that, Death jokes. Jack motions for Death to enter. Jack and Death are now inside the church. They both sit. Jack starts praying. Death studies him and questions if he's doing it right. Jack tells him to be quiet and to pray for something. After they're both done praying, they leave the church. They exit the church and Death becomes excited. He points to his car and exclaims, "Look it, new hubcaps!" Jack cannot believe that Death prayed for material things. Death explains he prayed for becoming an angel and Jack's well-being. He thanks Death for his kind prayers. Jack is in a somber mood. It is his last day among the living. He states that he just wants to walk the streets one last time. Death puts his car keys in his pocket. A short montage begins as they begin walking through the neighborhood. Their friendship, now fully realized, is seemingly coming to an end. As the montage ends, they are back in front of Jack's building. Death puts his arm around Jack and tells him he'll be there at 7:03 a.m. Both men part ways as Jack enters the building. Jack opens his apartment door and flips on the light as he begins narrating. He takes off his shoes and recalls the friendship he formed with Death. Jack washes his hand in the kitchen sink. He opens the fridge and pulls out a carton of eggs. He opens the cupboard and takes out a container full of coffee. There is a plate of eggs and a hot cup of coffee steaming in the distance. Jack is lying in bed as the clock strikes 7:01. He begins narrating. The clock strikes 7:02. Jack's eyes slowly close shut. His body lay lifeless. The clock strikes 7:03. Death is knocking on Jack's door, but soon realizes it's too late. He turns the corner and walks out of sight. As the credits roll, Death is sitting in a white office filling out a form. The form reads Application for Angelship. He stands up and hands the application to a Jesus-like man. The man studies it and stamps it approved. After the credits roll, a hand dressed in a white tuxedo shirt reaches over and opens the doors to a white PT Cruiser.